2021 was the year I played Cyberpunk at launch, and came out the other side thinking, yeah, that was pretty good. I also tried to play Undertale as a pacifist, accidentally killed Toriel, reloaded my save, and discovered that the game remembered what I did. And somehow, my favorite game of the entire year ended up being the only game on this list I didn't 100% complete. So what made this game stand out to me enough to make this list? Let's go back and see. Starting with number 10, Elex. Elex offered me something open world games rarely do. Player agency. Going from a weakling to an absolute powerhouse while exploring Magellan was incredibly rewarding, and I really enjoyed discovering every corner of this classic Eurojunk world. The 100% experience was pretty straightforward too, until I got down to one achievement. After 70 hours of doing basically everything, I just had to play for another 10 hours. Why? Because the achievement simply said play for 80 hours. I won't lie, that's one of the stupidest achievements there could be. So I left the game running AFK for 10 hours, and somehow, that ridiculous achievement is probably what I'll remember most about Elex. Not exactly the legacy the developers were going for. Number 9. Papers, Please. Papers, Please was a game I first saw PewDiePie play, and it looked exactly like my kind of game. And I was right. I'm pretty detail-oriented and meticulous, so checking passports for the glorious nation of Arstoshka was surprisingly satisfying. Finding the tiniest mistakes while gradually uncovering different stories and working towards different endings kept me coming back. It's a really simple game, but I ended up enjoying it a lot more than I expected. Glory to Arstoshka. Number 8. Undertale. Undertale is probably the most controversial game on this list, considering how passionate its fanbase is. And don't get me wrong, I really liked it. The story was interesting, Sans was hilarious, and I wanted to see what the game had to offer. I even did a pacifist run, but immediately ran into a problem with Toriel. After trying to spare her for what felt like forever, I eventually gave up, hit her once, and beat her in one go. So I reloaded my save, finally managed to spare her, only for the flower to tell me, yeah, I know what you did. I saw you kill her. That was a really cool moment, and it's one of the things that made Undertale so memorable to me. I just wish it had achievements. Without them, I don't really have that extra motivation to replay the game and discover everything it had to offer. Still, one playthrough was enough for me to really enjoy it. Number 7. Overcooked. Overcooked is pretty simple. It's one of the few games I managed to convince my wife to play with me, and we actually had a great time. Well, at least I did. We'd either win or lose, but pretty much every cooking session left her tired and stressed out. So she might not remember Overcooked quite as fondly as I do, but I'll always remember it as a game I got to share with my wife, doing one of my favorite things together. And we even managed to 100% it. So technically, this is the first, and so far only, game my wife has 100% completed. Maybe we'll increase those numbers in the future. Number 6. Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. DBZ Kakarot was one hell of a throwback. No other game gave me the same nostalgia for Budokai Tenkaichi 3 that Kakarot did. It took me straight back to my childhood, playing Dragon Ball games with my sister and cousin. I even remember keeping PS2 running overnight when I was at my grandparents' place, because apparently we didn't have a memory card, so turning the console off meant losing all of our progress. So playing Kakarot years later, I spent pretty much the entire game with a smile on my face. It ended up being my favorite Dragon Ball game I've ever played, and I also really appreciated how they handled the DLCs. They didn't add new achievements and suddenly ruined the 100% I'd already earned. And honestly, I wish more games handled DLCs this way. At number 5 and 4, a couple of Supergiant Games. Because 2021 was the year I discovered this developer. My friend was a huge fan of Transistor, so after playing it myself and absolutely loving it, I decided to go through their games in order. Bastion didn't really click with me, even though I loved the art style, but then I got to Transistor. And this game was an absolute banger. The combat was incredibly satisfying, and the build customization gave you a lot of interesting ways to play. But what really made it special to me was the atmosphere. You play as Red, a singer who had lost her voice, and almost everything about the presentation works together to create this incredibly stylish, melancholic world. The art direction, the visual style, and especially the music all come together beautifully. The soundtrack is probably in my top 3 in gaming, and honestly, Transistor is probably the game I describe most as the work of art. Then, I moved on to Pyre. It didn't leave quite a strong an impression on me, which is why it's number 5, but it might be the most unique game Supergiant made. It still has that beautiful painted art and incredible soundtrack, but the gameplay is completely different. You're playing 3v3 sport, where you have to get the orb into opposing team's flame while protecting your own. It's fast-paced and surprisingly fun, while the story is much slower and more meditative. That contrast might not work for everyone, but I thought the story was fantastic, and some of the choices you have to make are genuinely difficult. And that's probably what I took away from discovering Supergiant Games. They clearly have a passion for making games that feel different from everything else. I ended up 100%ing every game of theirs, apart from Bastion, and eventually the studio became one of my favorites. And while Pyre was a fantastic experience, Transistor was the one that really stuck with me. Entering the top 3, Fallout 3. After enjoying the original Fallout, I finally decided it was time to experience the series in 3D. And honestly, Fallout 3 surprised me. What's funny is that I feel like I almost never heard people talk about it. The conversation always seemed to revolve around New Vegas or Fallout 4, while Fallout 3 was rarely brought up. Which I found strange, because leaving Vault 101 for the first time and seeing the wasteland open up in front of me was an incredible moment. And naturally, what I loved most was exploring and doing quests. Your actions actually matter, thanks to the karma system, and some of the choices you make can come back to you later, or even affect how the story ends. I spent hours wandering into random locations, helping basically everyone I could find, and drinking one new Coca-Cola after another. The random encounters were another great part of the experience, because you never quite knew what you'd stumble into next. There were some things I could have lived without, especially the strange hitboxes when you're not using VATS, but overall, Fallout 3 was a fantastic experience. I actually wish it also had achievements, because I naturally played it like I was going for 100%, and that's probably the biggest compliment I can give it as a completionist. It's also the last Fallout game I've played so far, which means I've still got few bangers waiting for me. I just need the right time and the right mood to jump back into the wasteland. Taking the silver medal, Cyberpunk 2077. As a big fan of The Witcher, you'd think I would have been incredibly hyped for the Cyberpunk, but honestly I wasn't. I only learned about the game maybe a year before its release, so I didn't have years of anticipation behind me. I got gifted a pre-order copy and played it on day one, and despite everything that happened around its launch, I actually had a pretty good experience. I barely ran into any issues. I remember a couple of clipping bugs, including one where the quest NPC got stuck inside the wall, but that's about it. The funny thing is though, Cyberpunk didn't blow me away either. I think part of the problem was that I came into it with a weird negative attitude. I wasn't hyped for the game, but everyone else seemed to be so hyped for it that I almost went into it wanting to find something wrong with it. Instead of being excited to see what the game had to offer, I was almost looking for reasons why I shouldn't be excited. So at the time, I saw Cyberpunk as another really good open world game that I could enjoy and eventually 100%. But earlier this year, I replayed it from the beginning, finished Phantom Liberty, and finally 100%ed the game. And this time around, I enjoyed it so much more. I became more invested in V, Johnny, Panam, and the rest of the characters, and I finally started appreciating Cyberpunk for what it actually was. An incredible story, tons of character customization, different skills and cybernetic augmentations, and some genuinely thought-provoking endings. It's funny how much your expectations can change the experience. The first time around, I was almost trying to convince myself that Cyberpunk wasn't special. The second time, I was just playing it. And that's when I finally understood why I liked it so much. Which is why, after that second playthrough, Cyberpunk earned its place at number 2. And finally, we get to my favorite game of 2021, Days Gone. And interestingly enough, this is the only game on the entire list that I didn't 100% complete. I'm a big fan of Dying Light, so naturally a story-driven zombie game was right up my alley. But I knew absolutely nothing about Days Gone before my cousin gifted it to me. Thanks, bud. And I'm really thankful he did, because I got a lot more out of this game than I expected. One of the things that made it stand out immediately was the bike. A huge part of your progression comes from upgrading it, which reminded me a lot of Mad Max. And because you're constantly traveling across this massive world, the bike doesn't just feel like another vehicle, it becomes part of your progression and your experience. There's something weirdly therapeutic about just traveling through the world, following the roads and taking in the scenery, as long as you remember to keep an eye on the gas tank. The story was another big reason this game stuck with me. It's emotional, has a few twists, and actually made me stop and think about some of the things happening in this world. The combat was great too. Resources can be scarce, which means you're often encouraged to approach situations stealthily, and that's something I always enjoy. And then there are the hordes, massive groups of freakers that can swarm you with literally hundreds of enemies. They were one of the most unique parts of the open world, and taking one down could be incredibly satisfying. Although I won't pretend that all of them were fun. Some of those hordes were so frustrating that I had to attempt them multiple times before finally figuring out how to deal with them. But even with those frustrations, Days Gone managed to combine so many things I love about games. Exploration, progression, an emotional story, satisfying combat, and a world that was generally fun to travel through. Which brings me back to that 100% question. There are two reasons I never fully completed it. The first one is the goddamn challenges. Why did they have to infest my game with stupid challenges and put achievements behind them? I just can't stand challenges in games. Challenge modes, challenge maps, whatever you want to call them. They never make me enjoy a game more. And the second reason is the New Game Plus on the highest difficulty. I knew that after some time, I'd want to replay Days Gone anyway, so I wanted to forget the story a little, come back to it fresh, and experience it all over again. So instead of immediately forcing myself through another playthrough just for the achievement, I decided to leave it unfinished. And honestly, I'm glad I did, because now I have a reason to come back to Days Gone. And maybe that's fitting, because after everything I played in 2021, the game I loved the most was the one I didn't finish completely. And that's my 2021. Looking back at these games years later, it's interesting to see which ones I still remember so clearly. Not necessarily because they were perfect, or even because they were the best games I played that year, but because something about them stuck with me. And I think that's what makes looking back at these years so much fun. You don't always remember the games you expected to love. Sometimes it's the ones you discover by accident, the ones you share with someone else, or the ones that give you an experience you weren't expecting. And that's exactly what these 10 games did for me. So thank you for looking back through 2021 with me, and I'll see you in the next one. So I'm signing out.